The 16 skaters who competed in the 2022 Men's Last Chance qualifier for a spot in the Brazil-based Super Crown final had a 25% chance of making the top 4, because Gustavo Ribeiro, Vincent Malou, Chris Joslin, and Yuto Horigome were already guaranteed a top 4 spot given their lead-up performances this season. Not a ton of information is dedicated to the SLS point system, but from what I gathered, a win at any stop guarantees you 100 points. Second place gives you 90 points, third place gives you 85 points, and from there the points continue to decline, but as long as you competed in at least one stop and scored more than 0.0, you get points. For example, Tori Pudwill placed dead last in the Jacksonville stop, scoring a 2.0 in his first run with no makes and best trick, but earned himself 17 SLS points. Yuto won both Jacksonville and Seattle, and even though he didn't compete in the Las Vegas stop, his 200 points from those previous 2 wins were enough to force fellow countryman Sora Shirai into fighting for a top 4 spot in the Super Crown qualifier. In fact, if Sora landed anything else besides the 8.6 frontside 180 alley-oop 50-50 in the Las Vegas prelims, he'd have more than 200 total SLS points, which in turn turns the tables where Yuto finds himself needing to compete in the Super Crown qualifier. The lowest scoring contestant that participated in the Super Crown qualifier was 28th place Alec Majerus, who didn't compete in Jacksonville and overall had 44 points accrued from Seattle and Las Vegas. 26th place Manny Santiago had the lowest score of anyone who competed at all 3 stops before skating in the Super Crown, earning 58 points total and averaging just over 19 points per stop. Tommy Finn was the highest scoring competitor that didn't compete in the Super Crown qualifier, earning himself 121 points at Seattle and Las Vegas to rank 13th overall, without even competing in Jacksonville. The lowest ranked skater who competed in the qualifier and made the top 4 cut to the finals was 24th place Jagger Eaton, who only competed at Las Vegas this season, snagging 4th there, and skated well enough to place 2nd in the Rio qualifiers. The highest ranked skater to not make the Super Crown finals was 5th ranked Sora, who tragically couldn't roll away from more than one best trick, placing 8th in the Super Crown prelims. Unlike last year's Super Crown, the 2022 installment requires each skater to use one of their 2 line scores, which only adds to the pressure of needing to be top 4. As we'd come to find out at the end of the Super Crown Last Chance qualifier, anything less than a flawless run scoring at least 8.5 or higher would prevent you from getting 4th or better, exemplified by Felipe Gustavo's clutch, perfect 7 tricks strung together in the second run section of Heat 3. Felipe Mota was the only member of the 9 Club in the run section, but ironically didn't make the top 4 due to the betrayal of his signature kicky back tail. In order for Mota to get 4th, all he would have needed after his 2 9s was a 7.9 or better to keep out Felipe Gustavo, and a kickflip back tail slide is arguably doing too much in this case. A back tail down the bump to Big Hubba could have arguably been a safer choice for Mota, but he's got time on his hands to learn from these mistakes. In general, as the heats progress, so does the scoring, but that wasn't the case for the men's Super Crown qualifier in 2022. Admittedly, I have yet to log every trick from all the SLS competitions, but based on a very reliable source known as the comments section, this was the first ever Super Crown or maybe even SLS event ever where no one from the final heat landed a single trick in the best tricks section. Apart from Alec Majerus' last place finish, all 4 skaters in Heat 4 placed lowest in the field, with Shane's 7.5 from the 83.3% consistent 6-trick first run being the highest in the entire heat. This sheds light on a potential issue with forcing skaters to take one of their line scores. Shane's a seasoned vet in the SLS circuit, and he knows better than anyone that when your run isn't perfect and doesn't score mid-8s or better, you're going to have to really show up in the best tricks section to elevate your average scores. But if you're forced to take one of your 2 run scores, what's the point of risking life and limb in the best tricks section when you know a 7.5 will hold you back even if you score 4 straight 9.9s in the best trick? Knowing that relatively low run scores are guaranteed to keep you from progressing to the finals could be why we saw such a deflated performance from the best trick section of the final heat.
What are the most common things you're treating in that lounge?
Oh, Andrew, so many things. We see a lot of strained groins.
Who is just taking advantage of the free massage?
Definitely, maybe Midler. But we love Midler.
A combination of an essentially non-existent fourth heat and an overall stellar performance from Ryan DeCenzo in Heat 1 resulted in the 36-year-old Canadian securing the top qualifier spot. Ryan DeCenzo's clutch 9.1 in his last best trick attempt, less of a kickflip frontside nose blunt and more of a kickflip booger slide due to the head-on nature of the maneuver, tied for the highest score of the 7-9 clubs given in the qualifiers, alongside Sora's frontside 180 alley-oop fakie 5-0 on the same obstacle. Over 17% of the 283 total tricks attempted were applied to the bump-to-ledge obstacles on the course, with the gap to big rail and bump to big hubba taking up the second and third most skated spots at 47 and 39 attempts respectively. I might have missed which one of the non-center hubbas were skated, but one thing that was obvious was that, for the men at least, the manual pad might as well not even have been given the time of day for the course builders, because Shane's botched nollie inward heel manual to God knows what else was the only instance of anyone even paying the damn thing any mind in both the qualifiers and the finals. The hump/Twinkie might have only had 1 or 2 tricks thanks to DeCenzo's celebratory kickflip and later on with Vincent, but instead of being in the way like the manual pad, the hump at least served the purpose of allowing skaters to build speed by pumping through it. Jagger Eaton's switch backside Smith down the gap to big rail was the lowest score for a landed trick down that obstacle, earning an 8.4, while Mickey's kickflip front feeble earned an 8.6, and Felipe, Jagger, and Deshawn each snagged a 9 with the big spin hurricane, switch overcrook, and wonky tray bomb front grind. The lowest score on the bump to center hubba was DeCenzo's 8.3 kickflip crook, closely led by Braden Hoban's slightly more perfect iteration of the same trick to earn a 1/10 of a point higher. Braden stomped a kickflip frontside nose grind for an 8.6, and Kelvin did the same but scored an 8.7 to score the second highest qualifier score on the obstacle besides Sora's aforementioned 9.1 acrobatic maneuver. Kelvin's 7.9 was the highest score for a less than perfect run, thanks to his discreet bail on the front tail. What would end up going downhill one day later, Jagger was the most consistent skater in the qualifiers, missing only the switch flip back lip on his last best trick attempt, meaning not only did he land 3 best tricks in a row, but he put down 2 perfect runs as well. Jagger was also amongst the most productive skaters in the qualifiers, attempting 20 total tricks thanks to his back-to-back 8-trick lines. Eaton was joined by Luan and Deshawn in terms of productivity, with the latter 2 workhorse skaters also producing 20 attempts each in qualifiers. Shane, Manny, Alex, and Mickey were the least consistent in the prelims, each missing 7 tricks throughout their respective performances. Felipe Gustavo and Ryan DeCenzo tied for being the least consistent skaters to clinch a finals berth, with both of them missing 4 tricks. Shane was overall the least productive skater in prelims with 15 total attempts, mainly due to his diminished 5-trick second run. Had it not been for Felipe Gustavo's switch flip ender down the 8-stair in his second run, the Brazilian could very well have been watching the finals instead of competing, and he was the least productive skater to place in the top 4 with 16 total attempts. Deshawn and Braden were the only 2 skaters to traverse up a rail, and dare I say Hoban's grind edges out Jordan's slide in terms of scariness. Overall, the qualifiers appeared to be judged fairly, with the skaters' individual performances speaking for themselves to form the top 4 places. A little under 75% of the overall 147 trick attempts were successful in the finals. Unlike the qualifiers, the gap to big rail edged out the bump to ledge obstacle as the most used spot on the course with 28 tries total. An unsurprising statistic when considering these finalists know where the judges will score highest. 50% of the 28 attempted tricks down the gap to big rail were makes, with 10 coming from the runs, 3 from best trick, and 1 very important trick coming from the last super final attempt of the event. The lowest score given to anyone who landed a trick down the gap to big rail was DeCenzo's 3.7 run score, which featured a kickflip front lip opener, but 2 back-to-back misses later on with the nollie heel and tray huck. 4 9.3s were awarded by the judges on the gap to big rail, with Gustavo Ribeiro dominating 75% of those scores, thanks to a kickflip front board in his second flawless 9-trick run, a bigger flip front board fakie, and a front nose grind nollie kickflip. DeCenzo also got his hands on a 9.3 with a switch big heel board down the gap to big rail. 15 9 clubs in total were earned by the 8 skaters in the finals, making up more than 45% of all 32 scores. Felipe Gustavo was the lowest ranking finalist to earn a 9, thanks to his paralyzing 6.6 best run score that he's required to use as one of his 3 best scores. Felipe scored an 8.6, 8.8, and 9.1 from a handful of nollie flip into grinds and slides on the hubba, and the switch flip back nose grind earned him the 9 club. While the new SLS rules require every skater to use the best run score and 2 of their best trick scores, Felipe would have only jumped up 1 spot from 6th to 5th overall, even if he was able to drop the 6.6 and use his 3 best trick scores. This seems like an understandable outcome considering Felipe didn't step to either the bump to big hubba or the gap to big rail in any of his runs or best tricks. On paper, Yuto was ranked 4th overall based on SLS points, but his back 3s weren't cooperating in the final, tainting what would have otherwise been 2 consecutive flawless runs. Apart from Vincent's 4 on the floor, rollaway kickflip front side lip ender in the second run, scoring an 8.5, Yuto had the highest scoring run that included a full-on bail, earning an 8.1 on his second line. Obsession got the best of Yuto in the best trick section, where the expected top 4 placer bailed 4 times in a row on a switch tray front lip, ultimately placing him 7th. The only person who performed surprisingly worse than Yuto was last year's Super Crown winner, Jagger Eaton. Jagger landed a switchback Smith in best trick during qualifiers, but his attempt to implement them into his runs proved to be too ambitious, resulting in unusable line scores that fed into a detached Eaton in best trick. Unable to put up any scores and consequently placing last overall, but still allegedly cashing in on $750. Vincent Malou hung with the pack, but didn't really make a huge impression one way or another in the finals, placing 5th. Basically, Vincent was the lowest placing finalist who actually landed tricks on the biggest obstacles in the course. Ryan DeCenzo had the lowest score out of anyone who put together a flawless run, earning an 8.6 on the second line, where he had to bail what would otherwise be a smooth landing slightly early due to the useless mani pad getting in the way of his booger slide rollaway on the bump to big hubba. DeCenzo earned the highest combined score of anyone who landed a trick on both the bump to big hubba via the 9.3 kickflip front nose blunt and the gap to big rail via the switch big heel board slide. This fact right here is one of the few criticisms aimed at the judges, maybe unfairly punishing Ryan with an 8.6 on a perfect run. Even though DeCenzo was the only finalist able to thrive on the 2 scariest course obstacles, he missed out on 3rd place by a 10th of a point behind Chris Joslin. Joslin skated magnificently, knocking it out of the park with his hucks down the 12 stair, first in the big spin ender of his opening line, then in the best trick section with a decadent pairing in the form of a nollie back heel and backside big flip. While it can be argued in many ways whether Joslin should be 4th and DeCenzo 3rd or vice versa, 1st and 2nd place still need attention. Gustavo Ribeiro efficiently delivered 2 flawless 9-trick lines in the run section, scoring a 9.2 and 9.3 respectively. Nothing really new from Ribeiro was found in his runs as far as tricks go. It's just that he put 6 flip tricks in each run, the majority of which were in or out of a grind or slide, not to mention on the bigger, scarier rails. Even with Ribeiro's unofficially historic flawless combination of 18 consecutively landed tricks from 2 runs, Braden's 9.0 on his first 7-trick run would quietly keep Hoban in the hunt to battle it out with Ribeiro later in the best trick section. Gustavo put together 2 more 9s in the first 2 best trick attempts, first from a familiar bigger flip front board down the gap to big rail for a 9.3, then a tray frontside nose blunt down the same obstacle for a 9.0. Although Ribeiro was able to throw his trays far enough to lock into a front nose blunt down the gap to big rail, the judges seemingly docked him a few points since that trick was part of his first 2 runs, albeit on the smaller rails. Following his second best trick, Gustavo had a demanding lead on the field, and it looked like Ribeiro might have had the enviable luxury of winning before the extraneous superfinal goes into effect. But while Gustavo was soaring above the field with his scores, SLS newcomer Braden Hoban was warming up his flick on the bump to Big Hubba, putting together 3 back-to-back-to-back flip into grinds and slides, first with an 8.7 on a kickflip front nose grind, an 8.4 on a kickflip crook, and then a 9.6, the highest score of the final, on a kickflip back nose blunt. The 9.6 was actually still only good enough to put Braden within 0.3 of a point behind Gustavo, because in the eyes of the judges, Hoban's 8.7 kickflip nose grind wasn't worth more than either Gustavo's bigger flip front board circus act or all too familiar tray front nose blunt. Braden took the pressure and ran with it in the superfinal, cleanly and impressively landing an impossible front grind on the bump to Big Hubba to score 9.1. With the 9.1 eliminating Hoban's 8.7, Braden now surpassed Gustavo for the lead, the latter of whom was coming off his 3rd straight miss in the best trick and superfinal section. Hoban went for an impossible front nose grind to potentially further his lead, but bailed, putting Gustavo in essentially the highest pressure scenario, with Ribeiro needing to not only land a trick, but score a 9.2 or better to retake his previously dominant lead from the Jason Voorhees Monster logo patched t-shirt wearing rookie. Unfortunately, we'll never know what Gustavo actually landed on his last trick thanks to the hilariously censored head-on shot, but it must have been good because Ribeiro was stoked and he scored a 9.3. But yeah, Gustavo perfectly landed another Ribeiro signature nose grind nollie kickflip down the gap to big rail in the most crucial part of the final, understandably giving the Portuguese contest mainstay his first SLS Super Crown victory. Other highlights of this Super Crown were Sean Malto's calm, cool, collected, and first-hand experience-based commentary, which made watching the event more enjoyable had he not been verbally shedding light on the action. Unless I overlooked something, the biggest controversy was probably DeCenzo getting the usual Canadian score treatment in his second run, earning an 8.6 on a line where he landed a trick on 2 of the biggest course obstacles, and allegedly resulted in missing out on an extra $4,500 payout. If Yuto lands the switch tray front lip and then is able to pull off a nollie back 180 switch Smith, he still would have at best tied for 4th due to the low run score. After seeing how disengaged the best trick section becomes for skaters with low run scores, like in Heat 4 of the qualifiers, it might be best for SLS to go back to the old scoring system of taking the 3 best scores overall from either section. It's kind of a catch-22 though, because if skaters can scrap their run scores, lines might turn into a snooze fest, so it's tough to find the best formula to make for an overall exciting competition. If the Border.com's numbers are a reliable source to go by, winners of the last 2 Super Crown are earning less than previous SLS champions. Numbers seem to be all over the place depending on the year, but Kelvin's win in 2015 apparently amounted to $200,000, the highest number I could find on the website. 150K purses were supposedly awarded to Shane and Nyjah in 2016 and 2017 respectively, but the gravy train really lost steam in 2019, where Nyjah walked away with a measly 30K, and in 2021 and 2022, the first prize dropped to a pathetic $25,000. It'd be foolish to make resolute assumptions based on these unofficial figures, but you hate to see a decline in rewarding skaters for their risky efforts if the numbers are accurate.